some months since I last talked about Dance Dance Revolution, and now I'm back to finish the job. While interesting arcade machines were at one point plentiful, there have also been a variety of really rare and unique home games across different regions. Some are mostly just ports of their arcade counterpart. In those cases, I'll be listing those titles, but I won't do much in-depth analysis of them. Many of those do have some new and unique music just for their home releases and feature cool mechanics for unlocking new songs. That's pretty standard across many of these ports of the game, but where I'll really be getting in depth is in the weird stuff you may have heard only a little bit about, if you've heard about it at all, and the stuff you just can't find anymore. Whether you're playing from your living room or are out and about on the mobile device, let's get up and pretend we can dance!
Dance Dance Revolution.
The first home game DDR release was simply known as Dance Dance Revolution, released in Japan on PlayStation on April 10th, 1999. This would start a long chain of rapidly hitting DDR console releases, almost completely overflooding the market for several years in a row. It wouldn't be long until Japan saw console releases of Second Remix, Append Club version 1, Dancing Stage featuring True Kiss Destination, Second Remix, Append Club version 2, Club version Dreamcast Edition, and Third Mix, all within the span of only a little over a year. Things start getting interesting with the release of Dance Dance Revolution GB in Japan for Game Boy Color on August 3rd, 2000. Based on a small song list from Second Mix, the songs definitely sound like a shadow of their former selves. And just look at Afro go! Man, this sprite has some moves! What's crazier still is that the game came bundled with this bizarre rubbery dance pad designed to slip over your Game Boy Color and recreate an arcade experience. And it seems like you needed it because without the thumb pad, it was literally impossible for the Game Boy Color to register left and right arrows at the same time, or up and down arrows at the same time, so you had to put in button combinations like left and A or down and B. Culturally speaking, it may be hard to understand the release of the game Ohasta Dance Dance Revolution. Ohasta is the name of a Japanese TV program aimed at kids that started airing in 1997 and still runs to this day on TV Tokyo, so the songs you hear in this game's release for the most part belong to the show. Anybody out there familiar with the series of dating sim games Tokimeki Memorial? It's been hugely popular since 1994 with over 50 different games in the franchise having been released up until 2014. So why do I bring this dating sim up? Because Tokimeki Memorial 2's sub-stories Dancing Summer Vacation features a fictional DDR mix called Dance Dance Revolution Tokimeki Mix. You know, because both franchises are published by Konami. There's a ton more to this game, but it largely revolves around DDR with songs written specifically for this game and its franchise. During the same week as the release of the second Game Boy Color DDR game, Dance Dance Revolution Dancing Museum was released, and was the only DDR to be released on N64. Now don't get this confused with Disney's Rave or Disney Mix, those games come soon after, but this one features different versions of these Disney songs and a mode which combines the dance pad with the N64 controller, which seems kinda dangerous to me. But actually, to those who also know the Para Para dance routines to some of these songs, does it look like Mickey's performing the dance routine to Mickey Mouse March to You? Ddr Disney's Rave came out on Japanese PlayStations a little over a week later, which was then followed by Dance Dance Revolution Best Hits. As you might guess, this title is something of a compilation game and isn't especially unique. Then came another Game Boy Color title, this one being another version of the previous Ohastar game with the same gameplay functionality as the other two Game Boy Color titles, also adding in some mini-games. But February 19th, 2001 finally gave us the world's first DDR game for mobile devices called Dance Dance Revolution iAppli. And while footage of this game doesn't exist, some screenshots do, and if you remember what mobile phones looked like in 2001, well, let's just say this was not the most ideal way to play DDR. But it certainly wouldn't be the last time Konami would attempt to give us mobile versions of their franchise. Sometime later within that same year, North America would also get a mobile DDR game, which seems to have been completely lost to the sands of time. Nearly 2 years after the first console game's release, North America was finally given their own Dance Dance Revolution for the PlayStation, which served as our own means of playing catch-up with some of the most successful songs in the franchise up until that point. Later on that month, Japan would get a PlayStation version of Dance Dance Revolution 4th Mix, with Dance Dance Revolution GB3 being released on the same day. Imagine being a Japanese DDR fan on March 15th, 2001. There goes about $100 or more easily. Then just a couple weeks later came Dance Dance Revolution GB Disney Mix. Make no mistake, Konami was absolutely milking their property at this point. Europe was the last to join the world with home console releases with the release of Dancing Stage Euromix on June 1st, 2001. This of course highly replicated the arcade version of the same name. That same week in Japan featured Dance Dance Revolution Extra Mix, which was yet another compilation of songs from the arcade machines. And here's where we get to another unique home release. Dance Dance Revolution Famimat was the very first plug-and-play DDR game, designed for younger kids and their parents, including a Papa-Mama mode of some kind. Very simple and only a handful of songs with cheap animation and MIDI quality music. Soon afterward, North America and Europe got their own versions of the Disney Mix home release, followed by Japan getting DDR 5th Mix. America then also got DDR Konamix, which is yet another compilation of music spanning from the first mix to the 5th one as one more means of playing catch-up with Japan. And while Japan was releasing Ddr Max on PlayStation 2, America was still playing catch-up, this time with Dance Dance Revolution for PC. But finally, the US got Ddr Max half a year after Japan. However, Europe was still behind the curve with Dancing Stage Party Edition, which was almost the same thing as America's Konamix. In a shocking 4-month gap between releases, Japan would go on to release another unique title called Aerobics Revolution for the PlayStation 2. This game was aimed at women who just wanted to get in a workout in their own home and featured very little actual DDR music. The game featured your pretty standard home video aerobics and stretches, and even had a shape-up mode that encouraged the player to use weights to get stronger. Weird, right? Well, enough weird, it's time to get back to the usual DDR schlock. Dancing Stage Megamix came out in Europe 2 months later, then Ddr Max 2 started hitting the US and Japanese markets, adding more tracks to the Ddr Max original list. Soon enough, Japan would follow it up with the PS2 edition of Dance Dance Revolution Extreme. What's really interesting are the simultaneous releases of Dancing Stage Fever in Europe, both on PlayStation and PlayStation 2. While similar, they look and function somewhat differently from one another. Back in the US, we would start to get the Dance Dance Revolution Ultra Mix games for Xbox. These were interesting because not only were they not based on an arcade cabinet, but because the Xbox crowd, especially in 2003, was such a different kind of audience, the kind of music you could find in these titles sounded a lot different than what we might have been familiar with in the mainline arcade and console releases. Japan would then hit us with another compilation game in Dance Dance Revolution Party Collection. But then there would soon be a Japanese sequel to Aerobics Revolution simply called Diet Channel, once again aiming for an exercising audience with a slightly larger library of songs, mostly covers. Europe would begin to catch up with Ultra Mix with their own version of the same game called Dancing Stage Unleashed. Afterward, the US would finally get their own version of DDR Extreme, and just less than 2 months later, Europe would hit it again with PS and PS2 versions of the same game, Dancing Stage Fusion. Honestly, I'm a bit surprised Europe was still catering to a PlayStation audience at this point, while Japan and North America, at least as far as DDR was concerned, had already moved on to PS2 and Xbox. In fact, back in Japan, it's time for another compilation game in DDR Festival. Meanwhile, the US would continue on with the Ultra Mix franchise, with Europe following up with more of Unleashed. But finally in 2005, Japan would give us our first GameCube DDR game with Dance Dance Revolution with Mario. This game is a charming addition to the franchise with, obviously, the memorable Nintendo characters within the Super Mario franchise, and even includes a simple story mode with silly gimmicks. Though don't let that fool you, the songs do eventually get harder. You'll just have to eventually get to them. It wouldn't be long before the US would finally bring over their own versions of DDR Extreme 2 and DDR Mario Mix, with Europe not far behind on the Mario train. Oh look, here's another Ultra Mix. Oh, but Europe got Dancing Stage Max. What? It's not the same thing as Ddr Max? Oh, well what is it? Turns out it's closer to North America's Ddr Extreme 2. Huh. Well, why the name change, guys? Stop changing the names of all the games so drastically. Looks like Konami started getting lazy in 2006 because here comes Japan with yet another compilation title, and Europe would make another Unleashed title. But here finally came Supernova, which hit North America before it hit Japan, which was kind of new and kind of weird, based, of course, on the arcade machines of Supernova. A unique release, however, came out in 2006 with another plug-and-play game from the franchise called My First Dance Dance Revolution Toys R DRS version. And yeah, it's just as kiddie as it sounds, and there aren't a lot of options. The songs are very family friendly and don't even have vocals. They're all MIDI-sounding covers of other popular Japanese songs. It's not really all that surprising to learn that there isn't a lot of information to be found out about this game, but soon after yet another Ultra Mix game, North America got their own plug-and-play game in Dance Dance Revolution Strawberry Shortcake. Yeah, it's DDR with a 2000s Strawberry Shortcake skin, and its gameplay is super simple. Obviously for younger kids, of course. Hardcore players aren't gonna get anything out of this. Similarly, the plug-and-play version of Ddr Disney Mix played the same way. If you have a copy of this plug-and-play game, consider yourself lucky. This is hard to find these days. After Japan got their home copy of Ddr Supernova, a compilation game called Ddr Universe released in the US as the first Xbox 360 DDR game. And after Europe got their own version of Supernova, America finally also got their own version of the My First Dance Dance Revolution plug-and-play game with more Americanized music. America had two new home console options on September 25th, 2007, with Supernova 2 and Hottest Party, the first DDR game for the Wii that featured a bunch of gimmicks like the ones in Mario Mix. Afterward came North American and European releases of Universe 2, but after that came the release of Ddr Disney Channel Edition. This is a game I just can't relate to because I was never invested in this particular generation of Disney Channel hits, but I'm sure it's a novelty to somebody. Japan got on Supernova 2, Europe got Hottest Party, and then America got the first release of the console version of DDR-X, followed by Hottest Party 2, with Europe as always lagging behind, only just now getting Supernova 2. Oh man, wanna see the remains of DDR Mobius? Mobile DDR games don't have a very good history, and this one didn't look or sound very good at all. Nope. More of this universe stuff. Hey, what's this Fudu Party? Oh, it's just Hottest Party. Cool, I guess. After Japan got their own DDR-X release, they in North America also got DDR-S, which was yet another mobile phone release. This game actually stuck around for about 4 or 5 years before it was discontinued last year, although some people didn't necessarily find that the controls were very responsive. But a weirder release in Europe came with Ddr Winx Club. I'm a little surprised this one didn't eventually make its way to the US, since we also have an adaptation of Winx Club. But, you know, here's yet another novelty if you're passionate about Winx Club. I guess it was interesting that the background dancers have choreographed dances to each of the songs. I mean, that's kind of unique. Ddr Disney Grooves was the last of the Disney games to have been released up until this point, and unlike the previous Disney DDRs, this one has more traditional Disney music that has only been slightly touched up. Aside from more Hottest Party, S+, the sequel to S, was released in Japan and the US, but only had 3 default songs and expected you to download the rest, which, you know, kinda sucked, and it also disappeared out of mobile stores in 2015. So, sorry guys, looks like you won't be trying this one anytime soon. After an X2 release and yet another Hottest Party came the Japanese release of Ddr Music Fit. While this sounds like yet another workout game, it's not. It's just another Hottest Party, which is kinda lame. More international releases came, and then came a game release known simply as Dance Dance Revolution. There were 2 US releases, one for the Wii and one for the PS3, which function and look significantly different from one another. But, you know, more DDR, of course. But if you want to talk about DDR releases, you can't go without talking about Freedom! Freedom released for mobile devices in 2011 with only 4 songs, and then it was immediately ripped off mobile store shelves. Why? Because it was awful. And after all, it wasn't even technically produced by Konami. Even Naoki Maeda didn't even know that it was made until after it was released. That's crazy! And nothing of value was lost. Europe got DDR New Moves, but it was basically North America's PS3 Dance Dance Revolution. Xbox 360 got another release of that same game, and then it was time to move on to even more Hottest Parties, and the North American release of Dance Dance Revolution 2. Well, this numbering system is gonna start to get confusing. Oh man, one of the more interesting releases to date has to be America's release of Ddr Classroom Edition. Look at these kids go! All shadowing a song together as a group. Because that's exactly what it is. They certainly weren't all actually playing the dance pattern and getting scored on it. They all have their own separate dance mat that registers their personal calories burned and other stuff, and the step patterns aren't even pre-mapped, they're all randomly generated. I wonder whatever became of that program. And the final most recent releases of Dance Dance Revolution were also mobile releases. DDR Dance Wars was a mobile game that had multiplayer functionality, but went off the market when the development team broke up in 2013, so much for that. And finally, Ddr Pocket Edition was released in North America and Japan on October 5th, 2013, and was the very last DDR home game to have been released up until this point, which is so strange because that was almost 3 years ago, and up until that point there were a multitude of DDR games released outside of arcades every single year. This game also went for 2 years before it was taken off the market in 2015. So sorry if you're a mobile gamer, you're never going to see one of these older DDR games for mobile devices ever again. Guys, the DDR releases up until 2013 is absolutely insane! I can't imagine trying to keep up with all the purchases of all of these different releases, especially if you lived in Japan during the release of each of these titles. The amount of money you'd have to spend would be astronomical, and I can only assume that Konami kept making them because they were totally killing it with these sales. But clearly, times have changed, and now you can see that no new DDR release in almost 3 years means times have gotten tough, which isn't surprising if you know anything about what's going on with Konami as a whole these days. Woo! I can't believe we made it through all of that! I'm glad to have been given this opportunity to look at a lot of old, unique titles, some of which even I hadn't previously been aware of. Thanks for sticking with me through this, and I'll be looking forward to another request review to come soon.